Well, good evening. It's sure good to see all of you tonight. Happy for the presence of each one. We're studying in the book of Matthew, in Matthew chapter 26, and we're down to about verse 6 to begin this evening. Before we enter into our study tonight, we want to go to our Heavenly Father for a word of prayer, help us prepare our minds for God's things, and we'll ask Brother Nathan to direct our minds. All right, we're ready to study this evening about the precious ointment or the anointing of Jesus by Mary, and then Judas's bargain with the chief priests and the elders to betray Jesus into their hands, and also the preparation, if we get that far, to the last Passover meal. We're in the final days of the life of Christ, as Matthew records it for us. And last time we looked at the plot that the chief priests had to, try to arrest Jesus, and their plan was to arrest him secretly and not during the feast, but God's will is that he die on Passover, so that's what's going to happen. I might just read through these first 5 verses quickly from last time. When Jesus had finished all these words, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man is to be handed over for crucifixion. You know," verse 3, "Then the chief priests and the elders of the people were gathered together in the court of the high priest named Caiaphas. And they plotted together to seize Jesus by stealth and kill him. But they were saying, 'Not during the festival, otherwise a riot might occur among the people.'" So they have the intention to put Jesus to death after the festival's over, have him arrested secretly, and be able to do these things without stirring up any of his supporters from Galilee, or having a riot take place to try to defend him. But again, men's will is one thing and God's will is another. And no matter how these high men in important positions may be plotting, they're not going to accomplish their will. God's will be done. We're told in Psalms 2 and verse 4, "He who sits in the heavens laughs, and the Lord scoffs at them." In Psalms 33, 10 and 11, "The Lord nullifies the counsels of the nations. He frustrates the plans of the people. And the counsel of the Lord stands forever, the plan of his heart from generation to generation." So everything's going to end up working out the way God has planned, that Jesus die at Passover and be the Passover lamb for the whole world. And we're told again and again in Luke's writings, in the Gospel of Luke, and also in Acts, that all of these things happened according to the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God. And what we have is an eternal purpose that's being carried out. Now, in these verses 6 through 10, where Mary is anointing Jesus, this story is told in Matthew, Mark, and in the book of John. And we find out from John's gospel that this actually happened on the Saturday evening before these events on Tuesday. The meeting of the chief priest and the bargain with Judas, that takes place on Tuesday before the crucifixion. So it seems to be that he is, in Matthew's gospel, he orders things according to the way he wants to tell the story sometimes. That's just the way it works. He gathers together all of the teaching in chapters 5 through 7 under the Sermon on the Mount. Then he tells you about miracles in chapter 8 and 9. And then he groups the parables together in chapter 13. So he doesn't just go strictly chronological in his gospel. And you see that here because in the book of John, he tells us specifically when it took place. Now, when Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, a woman came to him with an alabaster vial of very costly perfume, and she poured it on his head as he reclined at the table. So John's gospel gives you the most about this. His gospel's written after the first 3 gospels, and he fills in some material that the first 3 gospels don't mention. So a lot of John's information from an eyewitness is to fill us in on some of the things that took place. And we find out who it was that anointed Jesus that night. It was Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. In chapter 12 and verses 1 and 2 of John, then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been dead, and whom he raised from the dead. And there they made him a supper, and Martha served. But Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with him. So it's quite a gathering of people that have come together when you put all the Gospels together. You've got Simon the leper, somebody that's been healed of leprosy. Certainly a meal where there would have been a lot of gratitude expressed at what the Lord had done for them. And Mary and Martha had seen their brother raised from the dead not too long in the past, and they certainly would have been celebrating that. And Lazarus has had his life restored to him. You can't get much bigger thing than that. He'd been in the tomb for 4 days and come back to life. And so they're all gathered together there at this feast. And you picture Martha serving there. Isn't that the way that she's pictured so often? Whenever she's mentioned in the gospel, she's the one that's interested in serving. And Mary is the more spiritual minded. When we saw her earlier when you're studying in the book of Luke, you know that when Jesus came to their house, it was Martha that was so busy getting the meals ready and all of that. And Mary's the one that just wants to sit at Jesus' feet and take in everything he has to teach. And Jesus told that she is the one that chooses the better part, right? That she is interested in the teaching. And we see an example here in this account, really, that she's the one that understands that Jesus is going to die. And she's got this very expensive vial of perfume that she comes to anoint his body with for burial, because she understands that he's speaking literally about giving his life up. And it's going to happen in not many days. And of all of the disciples of the Lord, she seems to have put it together as well as anybody, that what is happening is going to happen very soon. And she doesn't know if she'll have time to honor the Lord while he's still alive. So she's going to anoint him with this very costly perfume. In John 12 and verse 3, Mary therefore took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. So she pours this, it says, on Jesus' feet. And another of the Gospels, like we say here in Matthew, it says it poured it on his head. So when you put it together, it looks like he started at the feet. Jesus is stretched out on that couch where they're going to eat the meal. Starts at his feet and goes all the way up to his head. So both, you put it all together, it's in perfect harmony. And then it says that she anointed my body for burial, not just my feet or my head. I get the idea she poured the whole thing out. 12 ounces is what is in this pound of pure nard. A Roman pound was 12 ounces. And so it's a lot of perfume to be poured out all at once. And you get that picture there of him reclining at table and this lavish gift that's poured out on him. You put together all of the 12 disciples and the others that are mentioned. There's at least 15 men at this feast that are being served and they're at the table and witnessing these things. And quite an event. So Mary came behind Jesus, it says, with this alabaster jar of very costly perfume. We're going to find out from Judas's calculation that it was 300 denarii worth of perfume. A denarii is a day's wage for a common working person and a soldier. So 300 days' wage, that's almost a year's wages, right? When you put it all together of regular work days. Think of working a whole year for a bottle of perfume and then you pour it out all at once, all on one person. And it shows the love that she has for him, the way she wants to honor him in pouring this out on his body. And she knows that he's going to die. She's doing it for his burial. And so all of these things fit together perfectly. when you have all the Gospels together. Fill the whole house, we're told in John 12 and verse 2. I can just imagine, some people, they go a little heavy with their cologne or whatever, and it fills the whole room. You imagine pouring out the whole bottle on somebody, what it would smell like. And this nard comes from all the way in the Himalayan mountains above India, is where they got this plant that they would make this perfume from, spikenard. And so you can see why it was so fabulously expensive. Even the little alabaster jars made out of gypsum were very expensive, and they had a little glass tube on the top that you broke it in order to get the perfume out. And so that's the picture that is given, that she breaks it and she pours it out over him from this vial. And so she pours it, and again, says that the excess there that was on his feet, I guess, dripping and whatever, she wipes it with her hair instead of a towel. She takes her hair, and what is the hair, a woman's hair, described as in the scriptures? Her glory. Takes her glory to his feet, uses it as a towel. So her wipes her feet with her hair, and just total gratitude and love, sacrifice to try to show how much she loves the Lord and all that he's done for her and will do. And he's going to sacrifice his life. Evidently, she's paid some attention to that, to realize just how valuable he really is. He's going to lay down his life. He's come to redeem. So the Son of Man's come to not be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. I don't know if the other disciples really paid close attention to what he was saying, but she did. Evidently, she got what he's talking about. Any other thoughts anybody wants to share on these verses? Wow, this is really overboard. Maybe. All right, we know that Judas, his response is, and all of the others echo, what this is a waste. They take it exactly the opposite of what they should have taken. And isn't it something that all the Gospels tell us that? These disciples weren't perfect people. They didn't think things through perfectly, just like we don't. And they made mistakes and assumptions they shouldn't have made, and the Lord had to straighten them out. And you would think she would get great praise, but the disciples were indignant when they saw this and said, "Why this waste? For this perfume might have been sold for a high price and given to the poor." So they think all of this is just unnecessary, this devotion and this, there's other ways to show your appreciation for the Lord. Give money, we can do work with it instead of just pouring it out like this. And we know who was really behind this whole argument. And that's not told in Matthew or Mark or Luke. It's in John. John says, who started this whole discussion? It says, but Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples who was intending to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor people?" Now, he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. So I get the picture. He kind of stirred up the other disciples to think along the same lines as he did. And his motive sounds so noble. But John says, in fact, he was not interested in the poor. What he was really interested in is getting the money for himself. Put it in there and I can take it out. And we know he's got plans very shortly to betray the Lord. So this should have been sold. This is not the right way to act. But we know it was all a pretense, and it's something to be on guard against. It's easy for people to appear righteous and unselfish and so on in order to gain money and access to money, when that's really what they're interested in. It's not the noble cause that they're out want you to contribute to. How many false charities do we see? And how many politicians run on all of their concern for the poor and all of this good they're going to do, and then it ends up lining other people's pockets instead of what it was really supposed to go for. And Judas is a perfect example of that. And the disciples are taken in by it. They go right along with it. Just a waste. As one writer said, Mary gets nothing but angry looks and harsh reprimands for doing something unselfish in trying to worship the Lord. She gets criticized for it. But Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why do you bother the woman? For she has done a good deed to me." So who's going to defend her? The Lord defends her. He speaks up, says this was a good, beautiful, the word noble, excellent deed that she has done. When somebody shows their complete devotion to the Lord and wants to lavish on him honor and expense, he says that's a good thing. A lot of people, like, if you're devoting yourself to prayer or to worship, some people think, 3 times a week's excessive, I guess, that we would show up here and give up our time to worship the Lord and sing songs. Like, what good's that do? Well, the Lord thinks it's good. He says it's noble that we worship him and that we give of our means and so on for him. So sometimes it's all about, well, what's the practical good you're going to get out of this worship, and singing and all that? What good's that do? We should spend our time out, taking care of the physically sick or whatever. The Lord thinks this is a good work, to worship him, that's a valuable thing, to show respect and honor to him, a beautiful thing. So it's not right to criticize her. They need to leave her alone. And again, worship and devotion are not unnecessary, insignificant things, but a lot of people criticize them. They think it's all about a social gospel that you should be involved in. That's the only thing that matters. But this also, the Lord thought was important. What say ye? Anybody else have a thought on the passage? It's a good deed. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. So there are always going to be poor people in the world. Isn't that that's a big statement. I watch on I guess on Star Trek or some of these things about this idealistic future where there aren't any poor people anymore, right? They're all put aside, all of that. Now man has progressed so far. You don't have any people poor anymore. And the socialist dream, isn't that what it's all about? If we were all to become communists, then nobody would be, it'd be everything for everybody's need and not for me. But we never see that work out, do we? It never works out. If anything, there's more poor people in that. Everybody's poor when you put that system in, right? There's a lot more poor people. Just a few up at the top end up with money, but a lot of poor people. So Jesus says that you're always going to have poor people. You think that might be a prophecy there that's come to pass? It's been 2,000 years, and it seems to still be true, doesn't it? No matter what, the Great Society or Square Deal or whatever for these different politicians run on, it's going to war on poverty. It never gets rid of it completely, does it? Nobody has. So it really is true that it's not going to be eliminated completely. And what are the reasons that you're always going to have poor people? Well, the economy fluctuates. Things that everybody puts their money into goes bust sometimes. And in spite of all of our plans, we end up poor. And sometimes there's different tragedies that happens. I watched this thing on YouTube last night. There's a channel I watched that this girl tells different stories about tornadoes that have happened. It was Flint, Michigan in 1953. An F5 went through, killed 116 people and wiped out the whole middle part of that town. So many people injured, they couldn't get them all in the hospital. There were so many people. They went from a lot of poor people all of a sudden, right? After that happened, nobody had a house or anything. They had to... millions of dollars had to be contributed by GM and other things to try to rebuild that town and those people's lives. So you can have tragedies that happen and wars, and just free will leads to poverty, doesn't it? People get lazy, they don't want to work, and where do you end up? What happens to the sluggard? He ends up in poverty, right? That's where he ends up. Has human nature changed? Are there no more lazy people going to be in the future? No, there's always going to be. Some people, by their own misbehavior, are going to end up destitute. That's just the way it is. So Jesus tells the truth, and he always reveals the truth in spite of what all the theories of men might be. So, his divinity and his wisdom are just everywhere in the Bible, aren't they? Everywhere you turn, you see he's smarter than human beings are that come up with these plans that they think are going to work. Do the best you can to get rid of poverty, but you won't. So individual opportunities to do good, Jesus said, you're always going to have that. There's always going to be unfortunate people you can help. There's going to be opportunities for that. But doing something for Jesus while he's in the flesh, take up 2 more days, and that's going to be pretty much gone. He's going to go to the cross, and then after that, he just appears here and there, and they don't really, he's not dwelling with them anymore like he was before. So some things you got to do now. You can't put them off till the future sometime. If you want to tell certain people you love them and care for them, you better do it now because they're not going to be here forever, right? So some things you got to do now. You just leave the rest of the time wishing, well, I wish I'd have told them I loved them and I cared for them, I appreciate them, because it'd be too late. But Mary took advantage of the opportunity she had. All right, Mary did what she could. Does anyone have a thought on verse 11? Yes.
What she did forever.
So it's more blessed to give than to receive. And you could say that about any of the worship and the things that we give God. He doesn't need any of them, right? I mean, that true? He said he owns all the cows and all the sheep and all the perfume that's in the world. It's really God's. He owns it. But he wants us to give it, right? He wants us to be giving people and to honor him. And it's good for us to do so. It's the right and proper heart to have to honor him. Yes. And he stands up for us too. I mean, that's the thing I would take. Whether, you're sacrificing for the Lord's sake and giving of your time, and maybe nobody ever gives you any recognition or anything, that you're doing something. The Lord knows you're doing it. And that, as long as he knows, that's all that really matters, isn't it? You're doing it to please him, and whether other people praise you or say, hey, attaboy, what matters is the Lord. And he recognizes it, and he has a way of rewarding it that is great. So, he tells, for when she poured out this perfume on my body, she did it to prepare me for burial. Now, if the disciples had known that ahead of time, I don't think they'd have criticized her, maybe. But she's got her reasons that are right for why she's wanting to do this. And they don't know. They just see perfume poured out. But there's a reason behind it. That she knows he's going to die, and she's poured this out of love and gratitude. And again, she does it while she can. Maybe never she would before. So she takes those prophecies of his death. Jesus had tried to explain some of this to the disciples, that it's necessary the Son of Man's going to die. He's going to repeat that several times during that Last Supper. It's necessary for these things to happen. I've got to go away. I've got to die. This has got to happen. Right? And Mary, she paid attention. Truly I say to you, wherever this gospel is preached in the whole world, what this woman has done will also be spoken of in memory of her. So several things in that verse that are prophetic, right? The gospel's going to be preached to the whole world. This isn't going to end at his crucifixion. It isn't going to end until the gospel's gone everywhere. This is going to be a success. You might think the enemies are coming out on top, but it's going to lead to good news about God's love when you preach the whole message. Now, I know we might teach people, death, burial, resurrection, and I guess you could leave out Mary. But if you're telling the whole story, like Matthew is, Mark is, you tell the story about Mary anointing him, right? So how many different languages has that been spoken in since Jesus said that? how many translations of the Bible have there been, and how many different nations of people have read those Bibles and heard about Mary and what she did that night. Not a lot of people have memorials to them, do they? That everybody remembers them. There's not very many. I remember Jason White, when he got his Heisman Trophy statue or his statue at OU. He said, that's a big deal when you get a statue and you're still not in the ground yet. That's a big deal. That you're going to be remembered, right? So look at her. That statue may fall down. People forget all about who it was, but not Mary. She's going to be remembered forever for what she did, everywhere that the gospel's preached. And wow, the Lord knows how to reward his servants, doesn't he? He knows how to honor someone that honors him, and he certainly did that with Mary. Worship's a great responsibility, and doing good to others is important, but true spiritual devotion, it's the primary thing that leads to all of the other things, right? If you really love the Lord, without love, you're nothing, right? Nothing you do means anything without the devotion and the love. So the love is the thing to be most praised if you're going to point something out. She did the noble deed here because she loves. She understands what's going on. And it's the thing to remember about why we do the things we do. It's out of love for the Lord. So one writer said, one murmur may poison a whole community, but Mary inspired the multitude with this gift of love. All of the Christians that have read about that ever since. So she was unconscious of all of that happening in the future, right? She wasn't thinking about, I'm going down in history for this. I'll always be remembered. But just gratitude that she expressed, look what it turned into. So little things that we don't even think about, it may have an impact on our children and our grandchildren and people that are not yet born. You never know, right? So serve the Lord and love him. Anybody else have a thought on this account? Something to be conscious of in the things that we do and how we behave. And people are watching, it's going to we want to have a positive influence and a legacy that we leave behind. What a great one she had. Absolutely. And it's a theme in the scriptures, in the book of Ecclesiastes and other places about, it's right now that you can do something under the sun here. And when you get something done for the good of the Lord's cause, in preaching the gospel, edifying people, we got to do it now, because once the time's coming when we're leaving this world and we're not going to be able to affect things here anymore. We're going to be somewhere else. So if you want to have an influence on your children, grandchildren, your brethren, you want to save the lost, you got to do it now, and time is ticking by, and we don't have much more time to do it. So it is. It should make us all realize there's a limit, and we need to be making the most of our time, for the days are evil. So in contrast, and maybe this is what Matthew is doing and Mark in laying out the order the way they do with these two. In contrast, you kind of have the best of people in Mary to be remembered, and then you got the worst with Judas, kind of back to back. Maybe that is why they put them together in the way they did. That here is the other extreme of somebody that doesn't see all the spiritual value in what Jesus came to do or is going to do. He's just thinking about money and what he could have got out of a physical kingdom, probably was Judas' attitude. And then when he sees that's not going to work out, he's going to make some money another way. Then one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests. So they were there plotting together on that Tuesday night, and that's when Judas comes to them. And he's going to make it a lot easier for them to take Jesus secretly, because one of his inner circle here is 12 are going to be the one to betray him. We're told in Luke's gospel, and Satan entered into Judas, who was called Iscariot, belonging to the number of the 12. So at this time, Judas just gave himself over to the devil and his influence. He just made up his mind, I'm in this for me. And he should just let Satan take charge. Satan's trying to get us all the time, and we're supposed to resist him. And Judas stopped resisting him. He just lets him take over. And once you give yourself over to evil, woe unto you. And even though Satan entered into him, we're the ones that allow that. We have a free will. We don't have to let him take charge. So, Satan's wanting to work evil, but he gives in to that. And he gets hardened and driven along further into sin. That's what happens to all of us when we give ourselves up to the devil and his ways. So we're told that Judas is going to be held responsible. Jesus is going to say it later. Woe to that man. The Son of Man had to be betrayed. Somebody was going to do it. But woe to the man that actually did it, right? Because he did it of his own free will. He could have resisted it. And again, we need to resist the devil. I remember a lot of you never won't remember Flip Wilson, but anyway, he used to have a whole routine on his show about one of his relatives saying, the devil made me do it, was the excuse for everything she did. And the devil's trying to do stuff through us, but it's your fault for letting him, right? That's the point. One of the 12, it says, and that is significant because the Old Testament prophesied that one of the close friends of the Messiah was going to betray him. In Psalms 41:9, even my close friend in whom I trusted, who ate my bread, has lifted up his heel against me. And that's a psalm of David. And David had a parallel in his life to that same thing. Ahithophel, his trusted advisor, betrayed him and went with his son Absalom to try to overthrow David. And just like Judas, he went out and hung himself when the jig was up. When he found out he wasn't going to get away with this. And so many parallels in David's life that foreshadow what was going to happen to Christ. In John 13 and verse 18, I do not speak of all of you. I know the ones I have chosen, but it is that the scripture may be fulfilled. He who eats my bread has lifted up his heel against me. So one of you is that person that prophecy talked about. And it has to be this way. God foreknew what was going to happen and planned what would happen. And it makes you wonder about Judas. He was picked, and yet he was one with such love of money that with all the miracles and all the teaching and everything, he still picked that over the Lord. I mean, that's something to think about. Wow. And he goes to the chief priests and said, what are you willing to give me to betray him to you? And they weighed out 30 pieces of silver to him. So you can just imagine how happy these priests were. They're trying to figure out, how are we going to arrest him privately? He's always out there in the temple. There's all this crowd around him all the time. How are we ever going to get to him? We don't know where he's spending the night. And then one of his the treasurer of the disciples, shows up. Says, I'll sell him out to you. How much will you pay me? In Mark's gospel, it says they were glad when they heard this and promised to give him money. In Luke, it says, and he went away and discussed with the chief priests and officers how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he consented. So they see the deal going down there. What will you give me? We'll give you 30 pieces of silver. Is it maybe just a down payment? I don't know. Maybe that wasn't all they were going to do, but that's what he got to begin with anyway. And ready to go to work and carry out the promise there. I'll agree to that.
It was, like your face mentioned, scripture, 30 pieces of silver was not very much.
So what is that?
Is that right?
Yeah.
Compared to like a denarii?
Well, actually, it's a little bit more than a denarius, this piece of silver. It says the 30 pieces are 120 denarii. So what would that be? Each one of them would be do the math. It comes out more than just one to one. So, it's more. So 120 days worth was what was given to him, if you broke it down that way. It's what you paid if your bull was out and it was loose and it gored somebody's servant and killed him. Then you had to pay that man for his slave, and it was 30 pieces of silver was what you would pay for that slave, according to the law. And it's also what Zacharias, when he is talking about the Messiah coming, and the Messiah is the good shepherd, and he's going to ask people, what am I worth to you? What will you pay me? And that marvelous price is 30 pieces of silver, is what they'll pay for the Messiah, for his life. So it's fulfilled. All right, well, Lord willing, we'll come back there next time. Sure appreciate your comments and thoughts.